Yeah. Okay.
Ready to roll.
Welcome everybody to our last conservation sciences seminar of this semester. And so today we have the great pleasure of hosting Jonathan Losos. Some of you may recall Jonathan was he was here in person a couple years ago before COVID. He was our Cole Shorn speaker, where he gave a really fantastic talk. It's kind of legendary around here. There was a lightning storm outside of the window going on, and it's kind of legendary around here. Jonathan talked about his book, which is not his most recent book. He talked about improbable destinies. You actually have a book coming out now, right, on basically cat evolution and cat domestication here pretty soon.
I do, next May. Yeah. It's called The Cat's Meow.
Cool. So Jonathan, he's got some really diverse interests. Probably most of you know he's most well known for his work on the diversification of island lizards, and in particular, basically replicated evolutionary diversifications. But today he's going to be talking about a more, I guess, more recent endeavor of his. He was at Harvard he was at Washington University. I was a grad student there, and Jonathan was on my committee, and I had the pleasure of interacting with, we were all kind of in the lab there together doing molecular work, so that was fun. And
a long time ago.
Yeah, but he's back at Washington University now, and he's established something called the Living Earth Collaborative, which is kind of, I think, a unique collaboration that people in this audience are going to enjoy. It's collaboration basically between scientific researchers, so between Washington University, the St. Louis Zoo, and also the Missouri Botanical Garden. And so I think with that, I'll let you take it away and let us know what you guys have been up to.
Well, thanks so much, Ken. It's a delight to be here, and I had forgotten about that lightning storm. That was something on my last visit.
Yeah.
And hopefully no pyrotechnics here. All right, let's see if I can get my screen sharing working. Yep. Always a challenge for me. You should be seeing my first slide now. All good?
Yeah, we got you.
Okay, let's go. So I looked at the page with all your previous talks this semester, and what a great seminar series this is. I mean, what a great variety of things. And I was pleased to see that although a lot of them are sort of hardcore research conservation, there are other types of things as well. Pleased because this is going to be a different sort of talk, and I hope it's what you were looking for or interesting, but it's basically a personal story of how we created this new biodiversity center and what we've done in the first few years. So there isn't actually a lot of conservation science or research, and it's more just how a university and several partner institutions set something up. And so I hope you find it worth listening to the story. And as I said, as you'll see, there's a particularly personal aspect at one point. But anyway, that's what I'm going to do. And so here I go. So we'll start off by asking why there we go. So what is the Living Earth Collaborative? Well, the collaborative is a partnership, a formal partnership between three institutions in St. Louis, Washington University, where I am a faculty member, the St. Louis Zoo, and the Missouri Botanical Garden. And you may or may not be familiar with any of these institutions, but let me give you a little background on them. The Missouri Botanical Garden is generally considered one of the three top botanical gardens in the world. The other two being the New York Botanical Garden in the Bronx and the Kew Gardens in London. And it has this reputation not only for the beautiful grounds, which are fantastic, I'm showing you them here, but for what goes on behind the scenes, that the garden is a powerhouse of botanical scholarship. They have 45 PhD scientists on staff there. And for you botanists out there, they've just advertised for 8 new positions. They have the world's largest herbarium of flowering plants with 7 million specimens and growing quite rapidly. Every year they collect, I believe, something on the order of 20,000 specimens, and they describe 250 new species a year. I think that number is right. It's a powerhouse of botanical scholarship. And also I should point out, they have a lot of effort going into conservation of rare plants and ecosystems and sustainability efforts. The St. Louis Zoo is often considered one of the best zoos in the country, if not the world. You see these various rankings in USA Today or whatever, it's always way up there. That is usually based on the public exhibits, which are really extremely nice. It is actually the biggest, has the largest attendance of anything in the St. Louis area, even more than the St. Louis Cardinals, more than 3 million people every year. And so it's a wonderful zoo. But again, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that most people don't know about. And in particular, they have a wonderful conservation program that works around the world. It's called the Wild Care Institute, and these are their centers. They actually added another 5 2 years ago. And as you can see, they range from some things locally. Forest Park is a large municipal park in St. Louis. Hellbenders, the giant salamanders that live in, or the large salamanders that live in Missouri, and the burying beetles, which are also found in Missouri. I can't see them right now. And then around the world, Madagascar, the Horn of Africa, the Galapagos, and so on. So it's really a very impressive conservation program. They also do have some research, mostly focused on reproductive physiology and animal welfare, which makes sense for a zoo. And finally, Washington University is a fine university, and in particularly in the area of biodiversity, we've long had strength in that area. And interestingly and importantly for the collaborative, that strength is not only in the departments where you would expect it, biology and the primate and human evolution group in anthropology, but there are actually people interested in biodiversity throughout the university, including in departments as disparate as philosophy, political science. In the business school, there is a program that takes students, both undergraduates and graduates, every spring to Madagascar. They work on sustainability projects in Madagascar, and the idea of creating projects that can help with problems there, and that you can, and then they go to Madagascar and actually turn them over to the local people. And the idea is these projects need to be things that local people can take over as their own, and you don't need constant input from outside. And it's a fabulous opportunity for students, and has actually had some really good consequences. But that's at the business school of all places. The medical school has viral evolution, something in the news today, of course. Engineering has some relevant work. Social work, there's a woman who works in Kenya on people in rural areas and working on issues of sustainable development that's also, sustainable, but good for the people as well. Landscape architecture, a lot of interest in nature and its design relative to humans, and our Tyson Research Center. So the point is, there's a lot of interest and research on biodiversity throughout the university. So those are the 3 partners. And the goals of the Living Earth Collaborative, which I'll get to more later, are, of course, research, conservation, education for our students, and then outreach to the community at large. So how did the Living Earth Collaborative come to be? And I should say the collaborative is just finishing its 5th year now. And this is where it gets a little bit personal. And that is that, 10 years ago now, I turned 50. And I didn't expect, it's a number. I'm a logical guy, I'm a scientist, whatever. Well, I was surprised that it did have an impact on me. And in talking to many of my friends at the same age, colleagues in academia and otherwise, it was a very common refrain. So I'm warning you, those of you who are students, that this is in the future, or those of you postdocs or faculty who are not as aged as I am, 50 actually makes an impression on you. And the general impression was, time is not finite, that you should think about what you want to accomplish in the rest of your career. And if you want to do other things, maybe now's the time to get to work because windows are closing. And so in having those thoughts, I realized it would have been easy to keep on studying lizards. I enjoy it. I think the work has been worthwhile. And I could easily see spending another 10, 15, 20 years kind of doing more of the same. And at the end of my career, if I look back and said, I studied the heck out of these lizards, well, that might be an okay thing. But at the same time, there are other things that I've always wanted to do, like write a book. And that's how I came to write the book that Ken mentioned, and the second one I've written now. And the other thing was to do things that are beyond my own research, that, for the greater good, to help help save the world, if you will, or help work on biodiversity. And so these were thoughts that were really prompted by turning 50. And I began to realize if I wanted to do other things I'd thought about, I really needed to take steps. And so I thought, where might opportunities be? And I started, working on this idea. Well, a few years after that, well, 5-6 years ago now, 6 years ago, I happened to be at a reception with Barbara Schall, who is was the Dean of Arts and Sciences at Washington University. She stepped down a little while ago. And before that, though, she's a very prominent plant biologist. Many of you, I'm sure, know of her. And she had been my chair when I was a young assistant professor. And so we happened to be sitting next together, and we got chatting, and the idea came in, what about a biodiversity center at Washington University? As I said, WashU, that's always been one of our strengths. What if we had a biodiversity center that reached out to all the other institutions in the St. Louis area to try to build something important? And, well, maybe I would come back to WashU and be the director of that. So that was an interesting idea. Barbara said, let me take this to the chancellor, the #1 person at WashU, a man named Mark Wrighton, who was by training a chemist. And he had been chancellor for 20 years at this time. And we had no idea how he would respond to that idea, how he would respond. Well, it turns out he was over the top excited about it. And but it was his idea to make it a three-way partnership with the zoo and the botanical garden, rather than a WashU thing reaching out to other places, to make it a formal three-way partnership. And I have to say, it was I think a brilliant idea. And I can say that it wasn't my idea, it was Chancellor Wrighton's idea. And so I asked him later, where did you come up with this idea of this three-way partnership? And he said, look, I'm now quoting him more or less. I said, look, Mark Wrighton, the Chancellor of Washington University, I can say that we are going to make our medical school the best in the country. We do have a very good medical school. I can say we're going to do that. But in reality, you can't just make that happen, because every major city has a great medical school. They're all striving for excellence. You can't just by fiat say that we're going to be the best. But here in St. Louis, we have something that is close to unique. We have one of the world's great botanical gardens, one of the world's great zoos, and Washington University, all in the same city and actually within a couple of miles of each other. And we can quibble about what constitutes greatness, but there are very few other cities in the world that can claim that. And in fact, the only other ones arguably are in New York and London. And maybe even not London, maybe just New York. And so the point is, here is something that we can do here in St. Louis that is societally important, that's academically important, and our peer institutions, the ones that WashU compares itself to, Duke, Vanderbilt, Penn, they simply can't do this because they're not in St. Louis or in a comparable city. And so this is a chance for Washington University to do something important that we can stand out. And that was his reasoning. And I think it was kind of brilliant. Certainly, I'm delighted that he was so pleased. And so the Living Earth Collaborative was created, and that's how we came into existence. Now, the first question many people have is, well, where'd the money come from? That's all nice to set up this partnership, but where'd the money come from? And initially, it basically all came from Washington University. Now, the St. Louis Zoo in the initial meetings had said, look, we don't have funds lying around at the moment, but we're hoping to have a tax increase passed. The city people in St. Louis have been very generous. If they pass this increase, we will have more money, and then we can help support the collaborative. And in fact, they did. A year later, a tax proposition passed. They never pass in Missouri. That shows you the opinion of the local people of the St. Louis Zoo. And so the zoo has supported a postdoc that I'll mention briefly later. But initially, most of the money, the lion's share, if you will, has come from Washington University. Now, what about the long term? Well, certainly, this was a commitment for 5 years, but after that, or certainly they're not going to, this is not a forever commitment. And the idea is, well, the university loves to think that overhead will fund their programs. And realistically, that might be something that works for quantum computing and engineering and so on. But I think we all know biodiversity projects in general cannot be relied on to bring in enough money and overhead to support major endeavors. But certainly overhead is one possibility. But the main hope is down the line is through philanthropy. And again, quoting the chancellor, he said, basically, look, Washington University is very fortunate because we have a very generous group of philanthropists here in St. Louis who very generously support Washington University. But these people are the same people, for the most part, who are so generous to the botanical garden and the zoo. And if we can find a few of these people who are excited about this coming together of the three beloved institutions, perhaps we can get some major contributions that could really establish this for the long run. And so that's kind of the thought they had from the outset. So next, I want to talk about some of the challenges we faced in setting up the collaborative. The first one was, the idea was, what was the idea in a nutshell? And it was basically, we have these three institutions all working on biodiversity, doing great things. Wouldn't it be great if we worked together, if we made the whole greater than the sum of the parts and look for synergies and so on? But the problem was, as you guys all know, it's not like people at the botanical garden or the university were sitting around twiddling their thumbs. Gee, I got nothing to do on Thursdays. I wish we would create a biodiversity center to give me something to do. Everyone's way overworked already. So to actually get people to commit the time to get involved and to take on new projects is always a challenge. And moreover, something I'll get to later is there were no hires of additional people to support the center. It was basically bringing the people already here in place at the three institutions. Now, we have great people at all of them, but inevitably in something like this, there are some areas where we have a lot of people working and some other areas that we might like to have a presence where just no one happens to be working. And so we were initially constrained or channeled by who we have present on our staffs. And so those were, that was obviously going to affect what we could do in the short term. Second issue, unexpectedly to me, leadership turnover. So remember the two people I dealt with? The week after I signed on the dotted line to do this, Chancellor Wrighton announced his retirement, which I was pretty naive, I guess. Everyone knew that he was getting, as I said, he had been there 23 years at the time. So I thought there would be a few more years before he retired. And so it was a little bit of a this is the guy whose idea it was, who was so supportive, and boom, he's gone. New chancellor comes in, and a year later, Barbara stepped down, finishing her term. So, and in fact, these are the 8 people who were in the room, if you will, while the Living Earth Collaborative was being hashed out. Wrighton and Shaw. Holden Thorpe, the provost of the university, was also very supportive of the collaborative. He's now the editor-in-chief of science. This is the director of the Botanical Garden, Peter Weiss-Jackson, and the executive vice president for research, Jim Miller. Here's the director of the zoo, Jeffrey Bonner. I'm sorry, the CEO of the zoo. The director of the zoo is Mike Masek. Here's the director of the Wild Care Institute. These were the people who we hashed out the MOU and what the collaborative would be like. Now, 5 years later, only 2 of them are left. So then a lot of change in the people. And fortunately, the people who have replaced them have all been equally as excited and supportive of what we're trying to do. Another issue, and that is that there are many other institutions of various sorts in the St. Louis area that are involved in either biodiversity research and conservation. And we were very concerned from the outset that the establishment of the collaborative not create a wall separating, the haves and the have-nots, or the zoo, the garden, and WashU from all the others. And so from the outset, there's been a real effort to involve anyone in the area who wants to get involved. And in fact, just to show you who they are, St. Louis University has a strong biology department with many people working in our area. The University of Missouri St. Louis is very interesting in that it is not the flagship campus of the University of Missouri. It's very much a commuter campus. Most of their students are from the St. Louis area. So it's not a high-level institution of higher education. But years ago, they decided to focus, to try to build excellence in 2 areas: criminology, which they're very highly regarded, and tropical biology, which at one point they had arguably one of the 2 best graduate programs in tropical ecology in the world. And in fact, they created something called the Whitney Harris World Ecology Center, which trains PhDs from around the world, and primarily from people from poorer countries, so students from Madagascar, Ecuador, Kenya, Tanzania, even a student from Papua New Guinea. It's a spectacular program. In addition, there are a number of small schools in the area which often have a person or two working on biodiversity. My favorite is the St. Louis College of Pharmacy. It's been recently been named the College of Health Sciences and something like that. Anyway, College of Pharmacy, it does exactly what its name implies. It trains pharmacists. They have undergraduate and graduate degrees, but it turns out that they have 2 herpetologists on staff. Now, they weren't hired to be herpetologists. They were hired to teach various biology classes, but the fact are they are herpetologists and they do research in that area. And similarly, Webster University, Maryville University, and some others also have people doing really, really cool research. And then there's something called the Endangered Wolf Center, one of, if not the best center in the country, if not the world, for breeding endangered species of canids for reintroduction into the wild. And a spectacular organization. The National Great Rivers Research and Education Center across the river in Illinois, working on river issues. The chapter of the Nature Conservancy in Missouri is one of the best in the country, as is our Department of Conservation. So there's a lot going on. And so we were very much wanted to include these people. And I think we've been pretty good at that. I'll show you that in a minute. Now, another challenge, unexpected problems. And there's one in particular I'm thinking of, and that is, for whatever reason, when the time came to announce the formation of the Living Earth Collaborative, Washington University wanted to put out a press release and make a big splash. And so, so the day before it was going to be announced, the reporter for our local newspaper, the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, called me up to interview me about it. And so we were talking about it, and she asked me all kinds of great questions. We had a long conversation. And one thing I said to her is, I said, look, I want to point out to you that the University of Missouri St. Louis, which we call UMSL, everyone calls them that, not just us. And they have this World Ecology Center, which is spectacular. And the World Ecology Center is a partnership with the zoo and the botanical garden. And they focus on graduate training. It's not what we're going to do with the Living Earth Collaborative. So we're very complementary, and I look forward to working with them. But one thing you need to be clear on, they are already working with the zoo and the garden, and they've been doing that for about 20 years. They have an excellent program. The one thing you cannot say in your article is that something like this has never been done before. Well, you know what I'm going to show you. The next day, the paper comes out. Here's the first 2 paragraphs. A first of its kind collaboration. The people at UMSL were, I think, understandably furious. And it made, here I am sort of on the job for 5 minutes, and this is the first thing that happened. So it was a rocky start. I think we've gotten past that, but it was not appreciated. And Washington University is considered the 800-pound gorilla in academic circles in St. Louis, and so this just fed in. They've done it again. Anyway, that was not a great way to start. Other bigger issues in a longer term way. Different institutional cultures, something that I didn't foresee. And by that, I mean, the Missouri Botanical Garden is essentially an academic institution in many respects. It's full of PhD researchers. They go for grants, they publish papers. We speak the same language. It's easy to interact with them in that way. St. Louis Zoo is not like that. It has what I learned, I didn't realize this, what I would call a more corporate structure where decisions go up the chain, often to the director, instead of people. People don't have the autonomy to make decisions as much as in academia generally. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this. One thing is that they are very sensitive of their standing in the community. And of course, with animal rights issues and so on, they need to be very careful. But it's just a different culture, which at least initially was surprising. Perhaps more importantly, or in a different way, there are different priorities. Washington University is about educating students. Now, education is certainly something the zoo and the garden do, although they do it more in an outreach context. They're not a university. The zoo, as I've already pointed out, is is more focused on conservation than research. The garden does both. WashU conservation really isn't a priority. Research and education are our main things, although many people at the university care about conservation. But so these different priorities, were something to deal with, and I'll come back to in a few minutes, is something we need to think about moving forward. All right, so, and of course we were starting from scratch, and then of course COVID, which obviously we started in the beginning of 2018. 2 years later, we're doing great, and COVID shuts things down just as everywhere else in the world. All right, so that's kind of the story behind the Living Earth Collaborative. What have we done? It's been 5 years. What have we done? First and foremost, I think that we've been very successful in building a community. And by building a community, I mean of the practitioners in the area. And a lot of what we did for our first 2 years was just holding events such as this one, a dinner at the Botanical Garden. That's the Climatron lit up in the background, if any of you have been there. Basically, our motto was put people in the same room and good things will happen. And so the idea is we have these people in different institutions. They need to get to know each other. And I think this is a universal in universities. Even people in the next building you often don't know, sometimes even the next hall. The St. Louis Zoo is 1 mile from WashU, but yet most people didn't know each other. There were numerous cases in which I met people as part of my job. I went out to try to meet as many people in our community, and I met people doing, at different institutions, either working on the same thing or in very complementary things, and they weren't even aware of each other's existence. So a lot of what we did were holding social events and other events to get people together to not only meet each other, but to repeatedly meet each other. Sometimes, the third time you meet someone, you can get past like, what is it you do? And it begins to say, I was thinking about what you were talking about, and I was wondering if, and so just to create a community. And I think we've been pretty successful at that. I think that the people in the St. Louis area now see themselves as part of a regional group of people and work together. We created a title called Biodiversity Fellow. Generally, for the most part, it's professors, curators, people at that level with some variation, but not postdocs, not grad students or undergraduates. And we have 187 of them from 15 institutions, which I am thrilled about. Now, most of them are from our 3 partner institutions, but if you do the math, I think that leaves 39 from 12 other institutions in the St. Louis area. Here those institutions are again. So we've got a broad regional representation, and so that's in some sense our major accomplishment. We have built this community. We did a variety of things, a weekly seminar series just like this one. We public lectures, panel discussions became very important, particularly in COVID when we did these online. Had some very popular ones both on the pandemic and biodiversity as well as environmental justice issues. Symposia, workshops, these sorts of things. Now, of course, COVID really took a toll on this. We just started having public events again this fall, but these were the things we did to build our community. And as I said, we've got a lot of people, and I think we've been pretty successful there. Another major thing we did is we've given out grants to our fellows. So one of the perks of being a biodiversity fellow is you can apply for grants. And the grants, the 2 sorts of grants. One are what we call flagship initiatives. And the idea is that we would try to identify just a few topics that would be particularly important, particularly appropriate for us to invest in, because they're areas where the 3 institutions have overlapping expertise and interests that it would make sense to work together. And the idea is we would put in a decent amount of funding to try to get something big off the ground. And what these flagship initiatives could be is they could be research on an area, a taxon, or a conceptual topic, any of those ideas. In thinking about that and talking to the leadership of the institutions, there was an obvious first choice, and that was Madagascar. Everyone knows about the importance of Madagascar for biodiversity. The reason for this is it is the one place that the garden and the zoo already had a robust program going collaboratively. And in fact, the Missouri Botanical Garden has a spectacular program there where they have community-oriented conservation sites across the island. This is a map. They have this fabulous book You can see celebrating 25 years of what they've done there. And that book was published in 2013. And this figure shows their sites. There are 11 of them. They've added 2 more. So they have sites across the country. These are working very closely with the local people to make it a win-win to advance their own condition while doing it in an environmentally sustainable way. The program employs 150 people, 150 staff members employed by MBG, of which 1 is non-Malagasy. All the rest are local people. It's a spectacular program. Meanwhile, there's something called the Madagascar Fauna and Flora Group, which basically started out as a zoo group working to conserve Malagasy species. More recently, botanical gardens have joined, and the zoo and the garden are the leaders in this program. And so the zoo and the garden have worked together. A lot of work, the zoo's work is focused on lemurs at several of these sites that I just mentioned. And so they've been working together on this for a while. In addition, Washington University has a long history of people working in Madagascar. Bob Sussman was one of the world's experts on ring-tailed lemurs and on lemur biology in general. He was in our anthropology department for many years. I told you about the program at the business school. More recently, we have 2 assistant, Sussman sadly died a couple of years ago. We have several assistant professors. The women on the ends here, on the left is Krista Milich, and on the right is Emily Robluski. Jane Goodall visited us a couple months ago, which was spectacular. And anyway, they are assistant professors, primatologists, and they are interested in working in Madagascar. I have to digress. When Jane Goodall was here, I got to meet her. Here she is looking at my T-Rex tie, and I had a 3-minute conversation with her, which was perhaps the best 3 minutes of my career. Just spectacular. And I just couldn't help but show you that photo. Anyway, Madagascar was the obvious first place for us to invest in. We were fortunate. We got a big donation from one of these local philanthropists, $500,000, to set up a program focused on 2 of the sites that they already were working in. 2 sites that are rich in lemurs, to study the community ecology and behavior of the lemurs, including several endangered species, and to understand the community dynamics, which surprisingly hasn't been studied in too many places in Madagascar. So this was to develop 2 new study sites with the lemurs, at the same time to develop reforestation programs to deal with invasive species and to try to deal with some other forest degradation issues led by the botanical garden. So this is our first flagship initiative. The second one, just off the ground, focuses on wild canids, taking advantage of the fact, as I mentioned, the Endangered Wolf Center is here in St. Louis, and several of their people are biodiversity fellows. The zoo, of course, has great interest, and there's actually a researcher at WashU who works on canids. The focus initially is going to be on urban versus rural canids in Missouri, and to understand how they're surviving and a One Health approach to the health of these animals as well. And this is where the zoo has hired a postdoc to be an important leader in that project. The third initiative is on urban biodiversity. This is a topic I'm sure many of you are very familiar with. There's an extraordinary amount of interest in this topic from all kinds of different angles. Landscape architecture wants to work on building the city of the future with nature an integral part. There are people in biology and elsewhere interested in just how species are thriving, even evolving in cities. There's a lot of local interest. In fact, so many people, it's not actually clear which direction to go in or how you build a program because of so many people and so many diverse interests. We were all set to have a big meeting to kind of get the ball rolling, basically get people to meet each other and start discussing where we might go. And that meeting was going to be in April of 2020. So of course it never happened. It's kind of been on the back burner, but we're gonna get it started back up early next year, and hopefully we'll be able to do something exciting and impactful. Now, in addition to the flagship initiatives, we give seed grants. And seed grants, you guys know what they are. They're basically get projects started, new programs. And the one criterion was, or 2 criterion, had to be a new project and had to be a collaboration either across departments at WashU or across institutions. And up to $30,000. And here, just to show you a couple of biodiversity in Ecuador, combining frogs and trees and other things, how urban fish are adapting to living in the altered conditions in streams there. Looking at that was a genomics approach, looking at bat guano in caves in Costa Rica to try to figure out how the climate in local rainforests over the last 10,000 years, something that's we don't know a lot about. So a very diverse group of projects. Here's just the ones we gave in 2019. And as you can see, I'll give you just a moment to look at them. Their relevance to conservation is varied. You know, human-wildlife conflict, yes. Urban design for carbon storage, maybe. Turtle reproduction actually was focusing on endangered turtles. Zebras and Samburu pastoralists, yes, very much conservation oriented. Another issue that I'm very pleased about is the representation from across Washington University. The Brown School is our School of Social Work, one of the best in the country. The Sam Fox School is our School of Architecture and Design. And so we really have gotten involvement from across the university, at least to some extent, which I think is crucial. Because that's what the university really brings to this collaboration. You know, the zoo and the garden are really good on the biology side of things. The university brings biology, but also the broad breadth of other topics relevant to understanding what it takes to conserve biodiversity. Here's just the ones from 2018, again, to give you a sense of the variety of things. And again, you know, the extent to which they're focused on conservation versus genetics or other things. So over the 5 years now, we've given 30 of these grants. I want to emphasize, as I just did, how diverse they are. And that is both a good thing, but maybe not entirely a good thing, or at least something we're now going to talk about, but very diverse topics. As you can see, all three institutions, a lot of people have gotten involved. And as well, I should point out that biodiversity fellows from other institutions are also eligible, and a number of them have been involved also. I've been pushed to come up with a 5-year self-study of what it is we've accomplished with some numbers behind things that the deans and all want to know, you know, what has come from all these grants. We spent a lot of money on them, and are we getting reasonable return? And so some have failed, and for a variety of reasons. Armenia clamped down on research. People left the university, people got sick, so failed for a variety of reasons, as always happens. Some ideas just don't pan out. But 70% of the collaborations are continuing, either the project that they were funded for or something else. That seems like a success. And I mean, one of the reasons we did the seed grants was to get people interacting. And I would say we've been a big success on that. 9 of the grants have led to 13 papers. That doesn't sound like a ton, but remember, some of these grants were just given last year and there was COVID. To my surprise and very pleasingly, 10 of the grants have in turn led to external funding for a very whoppingly surprising $6.8 million. Now, I will say a lot of that money is a couple of medical school grants related to viral evolution, which they said were an outgrowth of our seed grants. And so I'm certainly going to take them for their word for it. But some of the others have led to nice funding projects as well. I believe the dean will be quite pleased to see that. Some of our bookkeeping hasn't been as good as it could be. And this is a lesson learned. We need to keep track of some things better. We can say that at least 38 undergraduates have been involved in this project. I suspect the number's a lot higher, but we just haven't recorded it. We've also had a postdoctoral program where we've hired 4 postdocs at a time. And again, they have to be collaborative. They have to propose projects that involve multiple mentors across institutions or departments at WashU. And of course, you know, maybe you don't know, but in my experience, programs like this, postdocs are often the lifeblood, that they have the energy. There's so many great ones out there that you can hire. They're at the cutting edge and so on. And we, of course, intentionally chose people who are interactive, who can't help themselves by getting involved in creating new programs. Here's our first cohort of them. And we've had now our 3rd cohort, and we've just had applications for our 4th cohort. I think they've been very successful. They've done a great job. They run our seminar program and a bunch of other things, particularly important during COVID when everything was virtual. They really stepped up to try to help keep the ball rolling in terms of interactions and cohesion. They published 48 papers, quite impressive. many of, in all kinds of journals, but many of them in very high level journals. They've been quite successful. Of the first 2 cohorts, 4 have faculty positions at our R1 institutions, I think all of them. One is an environmental consultant and just the job she'd always wanted. Another is a USDA supervising vet. She was a vet to start with and came to work on One Health issues. And the other 2 are still postdocs. And importantly, in talking to the mentors, many of the collaborations that were initiated because of these postdocs will continue after the postdoc leaves. So that too, that was a major goal of this postdoctoral program. Education, of course, that's an important, particularly from WashU's perspective. And I teach a course that takes students to the zoo and the garden every week. A number of other courses have taken advantage more of the zoo and the garden. So that's been good, a little hard to quantify. Again, our record keeping isn't so great. We've really worked to increase the number of internships available at the zoo and the garden and other places. And so we've formally given 38 internships, and research experience, including those 38 and others, I'm estimating 100 or more. It depends to some extent what you want to count, but a lot of students have been involved. All right, so I've got a few more minutes. As I said, the collaborative was started 5 years ago, almost, in a few weeks. By agreement, by the formal MOU, our establishment ends 6 months from now in June. The MOU says that we are renewable by agreement of the parties, and I'm optimistic we will be renewed. But as I said, the dean has asked us to do a self-study. Now is the time. What have we accomplished? And that will then segue into figuring out what the future holds. And the timing for that is really perfect because Washington University has just had a major strategic planning exercise. And this exercise, both the arts and sciences, which we hadn't done it for close to 10 years, but also the entire university had not done a strategic plan for more than 20 years. And so both of these were completed in the last 18 months, I would say. And the great news from my perspective is that biodiversity is highlighted in both of these plans as one of the great things the university does and that should be expanded. And I should say that it's not a laundry list of 200 different programs. It's a quite short list. And so the fact that biodiversity is highlighted is very exciting. And I'll come back to talk very briefly about what we propose we would do that helped get us into these strategic plans. But at the same time, the Botanical Garden is also doing some strategic planning. And as I said, they just announced 8 new positions. And the zoo is also in a phase where they're taking stock of a variety of things, but in particular, their Wild Care Institute is about to begin a planning process. So it's the perfect time because all 3 institutions are thinking about the future and making plans. The perfect time for us to move forward with the collaborative and to get it deeply enmeshed in all 3 institutions. So going back a step, I was asked, what does the LEC 2.0 look like? If we were to expand, how would we do it? And the really exciting thing to me is the possibility that we would hire people, that we would, instead of relying on the people who are here, we would say, these are the areas that we want to expand into. Let's go out and get great people. And I'm not going to go through, but as part of this process of figuring out, the idea is that everything is on the table. I've told you all the things we've done the last 5 years. On the one hand, we could just continue doing all of them. On the other hand, we could say those were good for the first 5 years, but now we have new priorities and do completely different stuff. So we really need to be very open about what moves forward. And in particular, a real question is, do we need more focus? And all these seed grants, they're great, but they're very diverse. And maybe maybe they serve their purpose, but now we need to intentionally choose the areas and really focus on them. And particularly to the extent that we want to focus on conservation of some areas, maybe we should intentionally do that and build strength in those areas and fund grants that will then lead to bigger programs. I'm not saying we're going to do this, but this is something that's being talked about. So we're having both an internal and an external review. And very important is that each institution needs to say what they want to get out of this. That, to be honest, Washington University, to a large extent, drove the bus for the first 5 years. But moving forward, the zoo and the garden need to reflect what would be good for, what would they like out of this partnership. And so we can come up with a plan that will satisfy everyone and can really get deeper buy-in for a more extensive program than we have now. What was that bold, ambitious view? Well, I have a lot of slides and I'm not going to show them to you, but the idea was simply this. Let's expand the LEC's focus, continuing to address broad societal issues, but in particular to intersect with areas to pick areas that intersect with other initiatives such that we could build synergistic strength. And I'm just going to go through them briefly. Far and away, the obvious choice was global health and the environment. And the major thing that the university strategic plan proposed, and I should say is approved, is the creation of a school of public health. And, creation of an entire new school is a big deal. We have a medical school, a law school, arts and sciences. This is another school of public health. And the reason for that is actually Washington University is already very strong in public health, but it's in the medical school, it's in the School of Social Work, there are people all over the place. And to really take it to the next level, we need to bring them together and then build on that. And that was seen as a very, that is enshrined in the strategic plan. And it's clearly the top priority and it's underway. But the good news is that people in charge of this initiative recognize that environmental health is part of public health, a very important part. And even the idea of One Health, the idea that the health of the environment and of nature and the health of people are inextricably linked, they consider that as important. So there's a real opportunity, I think, for us to build biodiversity and public health at the intersection to build something that could be really spectacular. And so I'm very excited at prospects for that. Other issues, of course, climate and sustainability, diversity and equity issues around environmental justice, a topic that's very important at Washington University these days, as is everywhere else. And I think there are real possibilities, particularly working in the St. Louis area, which has a lot of issues, as you may or may not know. Plant biology and food security, this in particular because we have not only a strong plant biology group on campus, but the Danforth Plant Science Center is a spectacular organization about 15 minutes from campus that focuses mostly on plant biotechnology as a way to basically produce food better and more appropriate and more efficiently, but they're also very concerned about the environmental impact of food production. And so there are great opportunities there. And then microbiome science, the last one, where the medical school has a tremendous program in microbiome science around humans. One of the founders of the field, Jeff Gordon, people talk about him getting the Nobel Prize for the role he played in that. He is still there. He's led a spectacular program, but it's of course all about humans. And so we could, as we all know, animals have microbiomes too. They're just as important for animals as they are for us. Plants have microbiomes. Microbiome, the term has been expanded to include stuff in the soil and so on. Anyway, it's a real opportunity to intersect biodiversity with our strength in human microbiome science, and again, build something that could be spectacular. So these are the areas that we would hopefully expand into, and expand by hiring people and intersecting with these initiatives. All right, well, I had a whole bunch of slides on that, but you got the gist of it, I hope. Oh, I should say as well, opportunities to build new educational programs that take advantage of the presence of the zoo and the garden, and what an opportunity that is both for secondary school students, particularly from underrepresented groups, as well as undergraduates, to really do something that could not be replicated in other places. Anyway, those are the ideas, and I hope you found this interesting, and I really thank you for this invitation, for your attention. And of course, I'd be happy to answer questions.
I'm sure a lot of people have questions. So how do we do this? Do we just butt in and speak, or what?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah,
You
well,
can either
thank you
drop them in
very
the
much.
chat
That was certainly an interesting thing. I don't know if I should say this, but when you first started talking about turning 50, I thought, oh, that's a midlife crisis. But instead of buying a sports car, you created a new institute.
Ah,
How's that?
well, there you have it. True enough.
Yeah. Anyway, I had just a couple well, not little questions, but the Land Institute, the Land Institute that's in Kansas, is that any connection with you? They have some, at least that would be one collaboration, because they work with agriculture largely now, right?
Yes, yes, they do. And they work closely with the Danforth Plant Science Center that I mentioned. And there are a number of great institutions not that far from St. Louis. The University of Missouri and University of Illinois have a lot of great stuff going on, and they're both within 3 hours or less. I think there are real opportunities to expand beyond St. Louis, but we're not ready to do that yet. But that might be something to think about maybe 5 years from now for the next strategic planning exercise.
Yeah, so one thing I would like to talk to you more offline about is a project that is started just before the pandemic here, and they really never finished up because it couldn't travel around the world very easily. But that's something here, and what I call it is restoring the planet while feeding the world.
Aha.
And it's how to turn agriculture upside down. So instead of taking these single or low biodiversity ecosystems, which you don't know how to manage without causing pollution of the waterways and all those, and restoring them to native habitats, and then using the native vegetation which can be harvested, like in the upper Midwest, prairie can be harvested yearly without hurting wildlife and without hurting the prairies. And then that can be converted into nutrients of life, which are used to create strawberries, carrots, filet mignon, and some places like Upside Foods is now starting that with meat, you see. Although the big picture isn't all put together, you see. So this idea of restoring agricultural fields to biodiverse areas, and then using that through a process of deconstruction and reconstruction to make food, this is a wholly new thing. But I do want to communicate more with you on this offline.
I'd be happy to talk about it because, yes, I agree with that vision. And yes, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So then I did have a third point here. I should let other people talk. I want to ask about the cat's meow, but I'll let other people ask questions. I'll shut up now. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Ken, will you be the moderator?
Yeah. I would chime in right now, everybody, if you'd like, or drop something in the chat, whatever.
Tom Radomski has his hand up.
Go for it, Tom.
Dr. Losos, thank you for the wonderful talk. My question is, do you know if, I know that right now the new geospatial intelligence agency campus in St. Louis is expected to interact with the industry and researchers a lot more. Do you expect the NGA to interact with the Living Earth Collaborative at all?
Well, I certainly hope so. As you know, that sort of approach is very important in our science and for conservation planning. And there's been a lot of discussion about that. And for those of you who don't know, the National Geospatial Institute, is that what it is? It's a big government facility, is located in St. Louis and just built a new center there. And thanks to these local philanthropists again, St. Louis University took the lead in creating something called the Taylor Geospatial Institute, which is to try to leverage the presence of the NGA here to make St. Louis a geospatial Silicon Valley or whatever you want to call it. But a lot of money to bring people together across many different fields. And St. Louis University took the lead, but WashU and something like 15 other local institutions are involved. And we've been in discussion. I would very much hope to, in fact, just to brag a little bit, the people at St. Louis University, the leaders of that program, asked me to come meet with them to tell them how we had designed the Living Earth Collaborative and to build, connections, because that's what they're trying to do as well. And then they took our ideas and did them on steroids to some extent because they had some wonderful funding. But yeah, anyway, it's a real opportunity, and I really hope it succeeds, and I hope we get to work with them. And they have postdocs and I think those postdocs require, like ours do, collaboration. You might be able to apply for a postdoc there that works with someone at one of the biodiversity institutions in St. Louis.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There are a couple questions here in the chat, Jonathan. I don't know if you have do you have your chat screen open?
I'm looking at it now. So Rebecca Buller says, super interesting talk. Thank you. It seemed even though there were a number of challenges, you seemed to tackle them well. What do you think was the most difficult problem? COVID? How did you continue fostering a newer community amidst the pandemic? Yes, COVID was, was definitely the most difficult problem. And, I mean, we've all experienced this. And so, of course, we tried to shift stuff online. And we try, this kind of thing, it works, pretty well. It's got pluses and minuses. But having community events, we tried to do that. We had a trivia night, a Zoom trivia night, had scavenger hunts where it was organized online and people went out, maybe they could meet in the park outside and so on. I can't say they were particularly successful. And I suspect you all have the same experience. People were zoomed out and they were so stressed about everything else, they weren't really keen on doing that. So we did our best. But I would say that, we did really well in getting involvement for 2 years, and then we plateaued. And I think people still, maybe even declined a little bit. Now that we're having in-person events again, it's been a little disappointing. Attendance isn't what it used to be. But on the other hand, I get the sense that's very common. And frankly, I'm a little nervous about going to indoor things with huge crowds myself. So I think it's going to take a time to get back there. But certainly that's been the biggest problem. And I forgot to say one thing about the Madagascar project, which not only did it get funded, but we hired a postdoc off of the grant. The postdoc's plan to go to Madagascar got delayed by a year because of pandemic things, but she finally got there and it's really thriving. And she's got a program with, I just want to brag about this because I think it's our biggest success so far, with 4 PhD students from the University of Antananarivo and 6 local research assistants and so on. So anyway, the point is, other than just bragging about that, is that got delayed by a year, and lots of other the projects that we funded around the world got delayed as well. So that's, it certainly was our biggest project far and away. And there's another question from Alex Jack, interested in what sorts of positions the LEC would be hiring for in the future. Well, we do have our postdoctoral program. Unfortunately, well, if you can get an application in the next 2 weeks, you might still be considered, but the date of that we would start looking at them was last week. But hopefully we'll have the postdoc program again next year. I say hopefully because we're going to reconsider whether the postdoc program is far and away the biggest user of our resources, and should we continue or do something else? I listed the areas that I think that we should hopefully hire in. What we would really like is to hire in those areas, the One Health, call it, say, public health and biodiversity, microbiomes, and so on. I'm hoping that we will very soon, next academic year, start hiring people in these areas. One thing we would really like to do as well, and there are discussions, is to get some joint hires, people who are both on the faculty at WashU and at the zoo or the garden, or maybe the Danforth Plant Science Center. There's not much of a history of that, so it takes a lot of figuring out how to make that work, but that would be very cool. I mean, what better way to bring these, to really tie these institutions together than to have people who, are, as part of their job, connecting the two. So I'm often an optimist, and I really think in the next couple of years, we will be hiring a lot of faculty in these areas. Let's see, should I continue with the chat?
Yeah, and yeah, absolutely. There's a couple more there, and then people feel free to interject too in person if you would like to as well.
Yes, please do. But Colby says, do you think that interdisciplinary collaborations like the LEC are going to become more common as conservation issues become more time sensitive due to climate change and other anthropogenic factors? And I think the answer is yes. So particularly conservation problems are so multi-disciplinary and take so many different, multi-dimensional, that's the word I want. The St. Louis Zoo is trying to create something new that's very interesting, and we're seeing if we can get it off the ground, where the zoo conservation community is very good at analyzing the biological problems that cause a species to be endangered. You know, they can collect all the biology details, and they've got all these great models and simulations, and you can pinpoint sea turtles. It's not the eggs, it's the adults, that because they're the ones that, or whatever, you get the idea. But that's all the biology. And they're really good at that. They've got the experts. But as you know, most of the conservation problems aren't just biology, they're human stuff. You know, why are people eating all these things or cutting down the forest or whatever? And that to solve many conservation problems, you need to address them from political or economic or social aspects. And so the idea they had is, look, you've got a university full of experts in all of this stuff. Maybe you can get some of them to get involved with us so we can come up with these formal programs to analyze problems and figure out how to solve them. And what I mean by programs is, you know, like a computer package where you can put in not only survival of different life stages, but political systems or economic issues. I mean, how you do that sounds kind of tough, but they're figuring, look, this is what the university brings to this partnership, is the experts in these many different areas. It's very challenging, but we're hoping to get that going. Part of the challenge is, you know, your standard, let's say, economist isn't going to get a lot of academic cred for working on sea turtle conservation, probably. And so finding things that people will either because they're interested or altruism or can get a career advancement, how do we make that work? But anyway, that was a kind of a rambling answer to, yes, I think collaboration is really important in conservation, and it's just more and more important. Abba Panda says, thank you for the wonderful talk. You're welcome. How do you overcome differences in institutional cultures, goals for these types of large collaborations? I recall you mentioning a few such challenges that come up. Yes, it can be challenging. And I will admit, I was quite naive about this. And so it you know, number one, it takes humility, if you will, or the willingness to try to understand what's going on instead of just barging in and saying, this is how it's going to be, or assuming that what you think is important or your institution is important will be recognized as important from other institutions. So, you know, particular advice other than trying to, you got to collaborate. You can't just insist this is how it's going to be done. And you got to understand that different places have different priorities and different points of view. And so yes, I mean, well, I think that gets to the gist of it. I will say one issue that we dealt with that's not quite the same. Well, it is sort of, anyway, as I said, this was created and you know, we say, well, here are all the people, get them involved. But everybody, their time is already 100% accounted for, and it can be very difficult. It would be great if people at the zoo or the botanical garden offered courses at Washington University. And there are many staff members who I think would love to do that. And some of them do kind of on the side, but it's not part of their job description. And you know, they have a job description, and so in an ideal world, the garden would rewrite job descriptions, but those things they're supposed to be doing, they're supposed to be doing them for a reason. And so issues like that have to be dealt with, and that's where hiring new people perhaps can be the solution, where you can hire more people to do the same old stuff, and then that is to say, 80% of 25% more people would get the old stuff done at the same amount and give you, I'm not going to go through the math. It would give people, the garden could get away with saying, yes, part of your job is teaching a class at WashU because they'd have enough people to cover what needs to be done. And those are the sorts of issues that got to be figured out and have to be sensitive to. I can say one thing that is going to come up, I'm really rambling now, my apologies. In our planning for the future is WashU would like courses taught by the experts in the field at the zoo and the garden. Now that comes at a cost to the zoo and the garden of those people's time. What we want to know is from the zoo and the garden, what would they like from Wash U? And some of these things will come at a cost to Wash U of, it remains to be seen. I can guess what some of the things are. And so what we really need is have a meeting where we say, look, these are the different things that each of us would like, and here's what it will take. And can we come up with a joint vision where everyone contributes? A lot of it will be contributing just people's efforts to take this to the next level, but in a way that each side gets some things at once, but has to contribute as well. And not that people have been contributing already, but to do it at a much greater extent. And it will be interesting to see how that plays out.
Sorry, I'm muted here. We're a little bit past the hour here, so I guess you'd probably be happy to take another question if somebody wants. But people should feel free to leave the room now if they'd like to at this time. And thanks again, Jonathan. We've already really interesting talk, and certainly a really interesting past, getting to where you're at, and we'll look forward to seeing where the LEC winds up in the future. A really interesting collaboration. So thanks again.
Thanks, Ken. I really appreciate the invitation. This was fun, and I hope you found it interesting. It was useful for me to actually put it together. So I hope it was good.
I have a quick question if I can jump in here.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, so I was curious. I mean, it's super interesting talk, by the way. I love this. I love breaking down silos. I think that's such a problem in universities. I'm curious with the scope of potential collaborations you mentioned going forward in the future, if there's any fear of getting too big too fast. I mean, I know a lot of nonprofit realms, maybe there's been some concern with big institutions versus more small local grassroots work. And do you guys have the conversations at all about those kind of topics, about getting too big or losing sight of kind of smaller efforts?
We haven't explicitly had that conversation yet, but I think to some extent that's part of the conversation that is coming, that if we want to make this a bigger deal, a 2.0, it's going to require the institutions to make it bigger. And as part of that, it might be to well, on the one hand, as I said, we might cut out the seed grants, we might cut out the postdocs. I hope we don't do that entirely, but we might say we're going to pick 3 areas and invest everything in those areas. Now that's not quite what you're asking, but it might make it much more. It might be much more restrictive in involvement in that way. That could also make it potentially harder for people from other institutions to get involved. I feel very good of the extent to which we've had people from Maryville University and Webster involved, but that might limit that as well. So I think that these are issues that need to be talked about, but I'll be honest and say the bigger problem, I think, is at this moment, our organizational or administrative structure has been very lean. But that means it's like, whoa, we're overwhelmed. And I was told that I was given advice, don't invest in staff early on, because they won't have anything to do early on, to hire a grants coordinator and something else, and use it to get your programs going. And so that's what we did. We basically had a half-time staff member and me, and then mooching off of other staff members in other places. But it's gotten to the point like it's overwhelmed. I told you, we haven't done good enough accounting of things because we just didn't have the staff. And frankly, I dropped the ball. I didn't realize we needed to be tracking that. So I think we need to get bigger, but there is certainly the risk, as you suggest, that you can just get too big and lose the advantages of small aspects. So a long way, another rambling answer of saying we really haven't addressed that very explicitly, but I really think it's coming.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
So do you have a question do you have time for a question about the cat's meow? I won't ask this unless if anyone else has any other questions.
Go for it.
Go for it, you say?
Well,
So, yeah, the cat's meow. So that's about domestication of cats and so on then, or what? What is it?
Well, all right, first, Thank you for asking. Since I've spent the last 3 years writing this book, you can imagine I'm happy to talk about it. I want to show you the cover of the book because I'm very proud. So this is the cover of the book.
Yes.
And the idea behind the book is it's first, I should say, it's about Felis catus, the domestic cat. And the idea was 10 years ago, I realized that there is a lot of really good science being done on domestic cats of all the same sort of things that we do, genome sequencing, isotope analysis, behavioral studies, community ecology studies, parasitology. And using the latest tools, much more research than I realized. I thought there was nothing going on studying cats, which I've always loved, I should say. I'm not sure if he poked his head up, but he's listening to the whole
See him
talk.
there. What's the name?
That is Archie.
Oh, yeah, Archie.
And so I had the idea initially of teaching a course for freshmen called The Science of Cats. And the idea was to sucker them in on cats and then teach them how we study biodiversity using cats as the vehicle. And these were freshmen. And so I think it was a great class. I certainly enjoyed it. They seemed to, and it was a lot of fun. And then I got the idea, well, why not take the same approach and write a book for the general public about, again, about the science of cats, but with the sub-theme being, this is how you study biodiversity. So it's about mostly evolution and some behavior and ecology, but mostly evolution. And so that's what it's been about.
So by the way, here's a little thing that really surprised me about biodiversity, including cats.
Tell me.
So I just yesterday in the ecology class, I gave this lecture on biodiversity and restoring the planet. But if you take all the carnivores and put their abundance and compute you can compute the Shannon index, but you can compute the effective number of species. See, that's how many are there effectively. That's like, if Shannon index is H, E to the H is the effective number of species. And it counts rarity and commonness of species. So if you include all the wild carnivores, you get some reasonable effective number of species, like 25. I've forgotten what it is. I wouldn't pass my own midterm. No, we don't put that on the midterms, but the numbers. But there's some reasonable number of carnivores effectively, counting their abundance is like 25. But when you include the domestic carnivores, the effective number of carnivores on the planet is 2.2. Dogs, cats, and some wild things. That's part of the extinction debt problem, And so anyway, because of course we take a lot of land to grow dog food and cat food, and we take that away from birds and wild birds and so on. Now, there is a solution to that I want to talk to you more about, and that's called restoring the planet and feeding the world. But that's it really surprised me how small those numbers are. The same thing happens when you look at ungulates. And the same thing happens when you look at birds, because the primary birds of the planet are chickens and geese and so on. And so the effective number of orders of birds, even though there's how many orders of birds? 40 or 50 orders of birds. The effective number comes to be 1.2.
Wow.
That's the extinction that we've incurred. It's sort of worse than the Permian, but fortunately it's a debt. It can be restored. There's that extinction debt paper from way back when I was still a graduate student. I was on that paper, and it can be restored. It can be repaid. It's a slow debt. I mean, it's a debt that doesn't come due immediately. So anyway, but that did surprise me when I calculated that as best I could from the data I had available. So that's something about dogs and cats and chickens and cows.
Is there a paper that those numbers are from that you have?
There's not. No, I couldn't find this in a paper. So what I did finally, just to show students, I was just going to show students. This was 3 years ago. I was first doing this. So I went to Wikipedia and took the abundances from Wikipedia, and they all have their sources. It's just not a paper. They list references. And so I did it one day, and I didn't know how it was going to turn out, and I was totally amazed. And that made this very stronger, that the only solution to the extinction debt that I know of is to restore the planet. Restore the half Earth of Wilson's is not enough. We need a 90% Earth, but then billions of people starve. So we need some way to use that food both for wild animals and for people. And so that's what this whole project's about. That I won't write you. I'll send you an email sometime next week because it's awfully busy here at the end of the semester now.
Yes, yes, thank you for that. Have you seen that cartoon of the biomass of the world? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I have seen those. I've seen diagrams that show the biomass of the world. Yes, and yeah, it's
And it's
amazing.
mostly cattle and people.
Yes, it's mostly cattle, people. Well, yes, cattle and people, but also chickens.
Yes.
I think we kill 20 billion chickens a year.
Wow.
I think that's the number. So yeah, we've become a dominant force on the planet. And we are capable of being an intelligence source on the planet, capable of that.
Capable.
Yes.
Yes.
So there's a paper that is in PNAS with Evel Gorham. Evel Gorham, his last message of hope to the world, and it's called Ecology of the Anthropocene. And there it talks about the ideas. It doesn't go deep into this, but it does give some hints about this stuff in that paper.
Very cool. And I want to say hello to John Feeberg, whom I recall meeting in my visit 4 years ago.
Yeah.